Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last day of EduWikiWeek 2022. My name is Vasanthi. I'm a senior program officer for the education team at the foundation. And today, me and my colleague Jessica, we will talk to you about evaluation and learning, particularly in Wikimedia education projects. So hopefully by the end of this session, you will be able to define theory of change, articulate the necessary steps for creating an evaluation plan, then describe different kinds of data we can collect and tools we can use to collect the data. Now, let's get a pen and paper ready, or digital one is okay as well. Um, we're gonna build a mini evaluation plan. So now I'm handling it over to my colleague Jessica. Please, Jessica.
Thanks, Baz, for that wonderful introduction. Yes, so I'm Jessica from the Community Resources team, and I work with learning and evaluation. So if you're thinking about developing your learning and evaluation plans, or if you're currently receiving Wikimedia funds or thinking of applying in the future, then please reach out to me. I'm really excited about working with you. So why is thinking about learning and evaluation important? And this is important because we really want to assess the changes that happen throughout every stage of our project. And this is the basis for learning really what is working well, what isn't working as we expected, is the change that we're seeing because of our strategies. And we want to develop an evaluation that is not a headache. It's not collecting a bunch of numbers that make us go crazy like Kermit the Frog there, sometimes numbers that don't even make a lot of sense to us. We really want to focus on four things. So one is data that really goes beyond measuring just our activities, but really focuses on the meaningful results. So not just how many teachers participated or how many teachers were trained, but really looking at what is the outcome of that in the short term and in the long term. What is the change that we're bringing about? Use that data to learn collectively, to make decisions, to be able to reflect on that data. Also evaluate things that are possible, that don't take up all our energy and all our resources, and data that is useful to really communicate our story to participants, to teachers, to the Ministry of Education, to all the stakeholders that we have, and to tell really the true depth of all of our work and the impact that we are achieving. And in this sense, it really is going beyond just some measurements or some metrics that measure our activities. As I said, do have teachers been involved? Have they been trained? We need to really go in deeper and understand why that happened. What was it in our strategies that were successful, or what are it in our strategies that aren't working and there are still barriers and we're not really looking at some of the key issues, how that change happened, who did it happen for, and we really need to go into a deeper evaluation to understand that. And this is what we're going to do today as an example. So how do we create this learning and evaluation framework? And there are many ways of doing this, many different theories and methods. One of the methods that we're going to use and that we're incorporating into the Wikimedia Funds project program is the theory of change. So I'm going to give you a quick overview, and we're going to start dissecting each one of these sections through a case study, and you're going to help us build this collectively. So what is the theory of change? In our theory of change, what we want to define is, how are we attempting to create change? What is it that we hope to see as a result of our work, both in the short run, the immediate outcomes of our work, but also in the long term? What are the changes that we're hoping will happen? What is the impact? And what are we assuming? Why do we think that it's our strategies that are going to create those changes? What are our beliefs? What are our assumptions? And once we have this theory of change clear, then we need to think about what are the questions that we need to ask ourselves to test if our assumptions are correct, to test if it really is our strategies that are creating that change. How can I see if I'm really moving in the right direction, or do I need to make changes and make those changes whilst I'm implementing the project and not wait until the project is ended? And when I know which are the questions that I need to ask, then I need to know what data it is that I need to collect to be able to answer these questions. And a lot of the time we start by looking at the data first and defining some metrics, but not really going through this process of what is my theory of change? What are the questions I need to ask myself to test if that theory is correct? And then what is the data that I need to know? And then define who needs to collect that data. What are the tools to collect that data? What is the timing that I need to collect that data? And finally, something that is really key and is often forgotten is, what do I do with that data? What do I do so that this is useful for our teams? This is useful for teachers. This is useful for our stakeholders, our partners, the Ministry of Education, and all the different actors that are involved. I need to think of the learning spaces where I can sit and reflect on this data, make decisions based on this data, and think of how this will affect our work in the future. So we need to create a learning and communication plan to reflect on our work and to tell the story of our work. So this might seem like a lot, and this is why we're going to start dissecting each part of this theory of change to create a learning evaluation plan by using a case study. So this is Wikimedistas de Bolivia, Leamos Wikipedia en la clase, which is reading Wikipedia in the classroom. First of all, a big thanks to Olga and Erlan for letting us use this case. It's just an example, so we definitely will not be honoring the richness and the detail of this project or the wider reading Wikimedia in the classroom program, which is developed in several countries. I think yesterday we heard from Ghana and Nigeria. This has been done in Morocco, in the Philippines, with all the support of the wonderful educational team. So we're just using this as a very broad brush, just as an example to walk you through the theory of change. So here is some of the context of this grant proposal that was approved in 2021. So this was a project that was developed as a second phase of the pilot project of reading Wikimedia in the classroom in 2020. And in this new version, some of the challenges that Wikimedia Bolivia were seeing were obviously an educational system still affected by the pandemic, the need to reach a broader number of teachers with teaching techniques in this digital environment and develop student skills specifically in media and information literacy. And so what do they see as a solution is, how can we promote Wikipedia as a pedagogical tool to foster these critical skills? And how do we build on that learning from the pilot project, where there was a positive acceptance from a group of teachers and a lot of satisfaction about the contents, the methodology, and really seeking to expand this. So some of the goals that the project laid out is, one, to improve teachers' understanding of how to use Wikipedia as a pedagogical tool, how to develop some really good educational resources that are contextualized, that are translated into local languages, that can be in different formats, digital and printed, to really reach the diversity of rural Bolivia and different teachers, but also with useful activities to incorporate this into the classroom, and also how to develop a community of teachers that could be an active part of Wikimedistas, Wikimedia in Bolivia. So to go beyond the project and really be part of the community and contribute to the wider goals of the movement. So based on this, they developed a plan. They developed strategies. So one is, how do we adapt and design teachers' guides into different languages? to create these resources and this curriculum for reading Wikipedia in the classroom? How do we train teachers effectively through a series of modules? How do we include, as a learning from the pilot, editing skills in the workshops that teachers wanted to learn how to build contents as part of this training? How do we support teachers with connectivity, with childcare, reduce some of those barriers that exist for teachers to participate? How do we create a communications campaign to really start building this community of teachers? And how do we create that interest for them to participate in the wider Wikimedia community in the future, and also act as mentors for teachers in future stages, so act as multipliers. So this is their plan. And I want you to use the overview of this plan now to start jamming with us. So we're going to go to this Jamboard here. I will share it on my screen. Okay, it's come up. So we're going to use this Jamboard to think here of our theory of change for Wikimedia Bolivia. So what are the main strategies? What are the outcomes that are expected as a result of the work? What is the longer term impact? So if I implement X strategies, why do I think that these outcomes are going to happen in the short run and in the long term? And what are my assumptions? What am I assuming? Why am I assuming that that is going to happen? What are the conditions that need to be in place so that if I implement these activities, this is the result that I'm gonna have. Those are our assumptions. So I don't want you to think of a million things. We're just gonna have 2 minutes here where we can use some examples think about the case study. You can use in the second board. There's a brief description of what I've just explained of the case study so that we can go through and try to build this theory of change. So I'll give you 2 minutes to do that, and then we're going to see a possible theory of change and see how that compares with some of the ideas that you've had. Okay, just 1 more minute there to think of some ideas of that theory of change. Remember, you can go to board 2 if you need to recap any of the information about the case study. I love my little Octavia here by my side. Feels like she's giving me energies, good energies during this workshop. Okay, so I'm sure you've come up with some really great ideas. And there's no right answer here. So we just want to share with you, what is the theory of change that Vaz and I saw, and maybe you can take a minute just to see how similar it is to yours. So remember, the theory of change has those 4 components. So the first is, if we do this, then we will achieve this in the short run, and hopefully this in the long run. And these are our assumptions. So some of the if we that we saw were, if we train teachers to improve their understanding of how to use Wikipedia as a pedagogical tool, if we really localize the teacher's guides and create training that is contextualized and adaptable to different learning needs, if we distribute these materials in diverse regions, if we develop educational resources which really give teachers classroom activities and practical ways of implementing this, if we develop the right incentives such as connectivity, childcare, to really promote participation and reduce barriers to participation, if we motivate teachers to participate in other Wikimedia events and community activities, if we train them as potential mentors, then hopefully what will we achieve in our project? We will have teachers that are more aware, they have the right skills and tools to use Wikipedia as a pedagogical tool for developing media and information literacy. We will also, teachers will be able to incorporate this in a practical way, so go from learning the skill to actual practice. There will be a group of teachers that will actually be engaged in the wider Wikimedia community with perspectives of participating more actively in the long run, and there will be teachers trained to be able to multiply and be future mentors. What do we want in the long run? We want educators that will be able to transfer these skills and to navigate Wikipedia more critically, that this will lead to students that will value Wikipedia and use it responsibly and actively, that Wikipedia will be viewed more positively by educators, more positively by the educational system as a pedagogical tool, and one that also help promotes, as in Bolivia, several of the pillars of the educational system, such as plurilingualism. I should be able to say that with clarity. And that there will be interest in contributing to Wikimedia's growth in general. So these are some of the long-term changes that we want to see. And what are we assuming? Why do we think that this change will happen? Very important beforehand, to say that in a lot of cases, these theories of change are developed by a few people on their desk thinking about the theory of change. And we really want to promote an empowering participatory evaluation. So this would be so much more enriched if we actually get teachers involved, we actually get some of the partners involved to work through this theory of change at the start of the project and think through what is it that we want to achieve and why are we going to evaluate this, so that when we come to evaluate this, the questions that we ask, the data that we're collecting, hopefully with the participation of teachers themselves, will make sense to everybody. And when we sit down to evaluate this data and learn from it, we'll understand why it makes sense and that we're all on board with the same outcomes and desires. So some of the assumptions that Vaz and I thought about, like why do we think this is going to happen? What are the conditions needed for this to happen? So we're assuming that teachers will have the interest and will have the time to incorporate the learning into the classroom, that the way that these booklets have been developed in different languages, the different training sessions that are carried out, will be a good approach, it will be a good solution, that we've properly evaluated the learning needs and have developed material that responds to this, that connectivity will not be a barrier, and that through the limited financial support, teachers will be able to participate, and that educational authorities will support the use of Wikipedia in the classroom. So all these conditions we're assuming will be met so that our change will happen. What do I need to do now? I need to define some strategic learning questions. And what is a strategic learning question? It's a question that when answered, it will tell me if I was correct, if effectively those strategies are creating those desired outcomes, and were my assumptions right or were they not right? And based on these strategic learning questions is where I'm going to define what data it is I need to collect to answer these questions. Just a few tips about defining learning questions. One is that it should be applicable so that we can apply the learning question and try to answer it during our implementation, that it's answerable so that we can actually have some data to help us answer these questions in the time frame and the resources that are available, and that it's actionable so that it can really inform decision making, and that it's direct enough so we can focus our evaluation. They're not very high level questions that aren't going to really answer if our strategy is working. So what are we going to do? We're going to jam again. And again, don't worry if in 2 minutes you can't get down all your ideas. What we want you to do is take that theory of change that we developed together for Wikimedia Bolivia's project and think about what are some of the learning questions that might help us see if that theory of change is true, right? So we're going to go again. We're going to jump to a Jamboard that I will share here. And think of maximum, can be 1, but maximum 3 key learning questions for this project. And I want you to, again, use the Post-it. So you can use the Post-it here, write your ideas, brilliant ideas, and just start sticking them on there. Okay, we'll have just 2 minutes. I've put 2 possible learning questions as an example. Okay, just 1 more minute there to get some of your learning questions. If you can't do it on the Jamboard, use the chat. We can put them directly on the Jamboard for you. Okay, and again, I'm sure you've come up with some really great questions. Here are some that Vaz and I thought of, and we divided them by the 3 different goals that the project has. So some of the learning questions regarding, are teachers able to understand and apply Wikipedia as a tool? So some of the questions we thought of, what strategies were helpful for engaging teachers to participate and complete the training? How are teachers incorporating this into the classroom? What factors help them or are acting as barriers? How have teachers' perspectives about Wikipedia changed after the program? And can teachers help their students navigate Wikipedia more critically? So are they transferring these skills to their students? Another example of the question is regarding the educational resources. So what were the key elements that made these resources effective and available? Was it the content, the translation, the fact that it was printed and distributed? What are the perspectives for the future use of these materials? And in terms of this idea that teachers will be part of the Wikimedia community and also act as mentors in the future to other teachers, we want to ask, what type of support and activities are most interesting to teachers who want to learn more about Wikimedia community? So before knowing, are they editors or are they interested in, what would motivate them to participate? We really want to know that, because in the long run, that might be more important than just getting them to edit, one article. Is actually knowing what might motivate them in the future to be part of the community. What are the barriers that they might face to actively participate? How are they engaging in the community? Are they participating in events? Are they participating in communications that the movement has? Did the teachers that want to be mentors develop the skills and they have the time and the motivation to be mentors? So these are just some of the questions that will really start to define our learning and data collection. Again, the participation. How can teachers be involved in defining some of these questions before we start collecting the data with them? I mentioned teachers as one of the main stakeholders, but we can also include a number of partners and different actors. Okay, now we get to the really fun bit, is how do we answer these questions? What data do we need to collect, and how do we collect this data? And before we move on to this, and I'm going to pass this over to Vaz, who's sensei in data collection, specifically the type of data that we want, is to combine quantitative data. So that data that is, usually when we think of data, we usually think, oh, it's those numbers, it's the famous number of participants and editors and contents. It's that thing that you can quantify. But actually, data is beyond that. Data is also qualitative data. Data can be perceptions, can be opinions, can be testimonies, visual representations that tell us the story of not only what the numbers, but why, or why not something happened. And that's where we get a lot of the data that we need to answer those questions beyond the numbers. So when we talk about data, we're talking about both quantitative and qualitative data. And today we're going to focus very much on qualitative methods, because we think that these will definitely help us evaluate these questions and answer these questions. So before going to jam again around some of the data, I want you to take a few minutes to analyze the data proposed by Wikimedia Bolivia in their grant proposal. Take a few seconds to think, will this data actually answer our questions, or what is missing in this data? Just going to pause there to give you some seconds to read through that. So these are a few of the observations that came out of our reflection. I don't know if some of you perceive some of these points, but really thinking about our learning questions and what we want to evaluate, we can see that there are several metrics which really are important to measure activities. Did the number of training happen? Did we achieve the number of sessions? Did we reach the right number of teachers? They're important for monitoring our work, but they won't fully answer the questions that we need to answer, right? Also, it's common to see in projects that we see as a metric, conduct an assessment survey. And that's a tool, and that's a data collection method, but it's not the data in itself, or it's not a metric in itself. We would have to really determine what is the metric that we want to calculate from the survey. For example, percentage of teachers that say that the training and resources gave them the skills needed and that they are incorporating this into the lesson planning. And that would be a metric, not the survey in itself. This one may be a good way to see if some of the skills were learned and incorporated into practice. So actually, the final works that were developed, sorry, it's meant to be this one, the 40 final works of classroom activities. And this is to show that the teachers have learned the skills, they've developed classroom activities, and they're sharing those resources. So this is could be a metric that works to help us answer some of the questions around the skills they learned and how they're putting this into practice. Then we have some of the indicators that traditionally have been required and are included in projects, but are they really relevant for the core outcomes that we're looking for? So we're not saying that we want all the teachers to become editors. We want them to learn skills in editing as part of the literacy and information skills, media and information skills. And hopefully in the future, they'd like to contribute to Wikipedia, but they're not, our main indicator isn't if they become necessarily 60 editors. And we really want to know what motivates them to continue to contribute. So just that number may not be useful. It might seem like a high number, a good number, but that's not really the focus of the outcome. And also, we're talking about using some of the different Wikimedia projects, and maybe Commons will come in, but really uploading images into WikiCommons. Yes, that may sound like a great indicator, but that's not really a focus of our intention. And it's the first time that it's been mentioned in our whole theory of change. So maybe that's not so relevant. So also some of those traditional metrics, we need to evaluate them so they really make sense. And I think that this is an interesting, very brief overview of some of the indicators that come up in projects, which are, yes, important. We're not saying that they're bad metrics, but they're not necessarily going to tell us the full picture of what we need to test and learn from our theory of change, right? So here are some quick tips to help you recap when you're thinking about your data. Really always go back to that theory of change, to those learning questions, and see, is that data, if I collect that data, will it help me answer those learning questions? And where possible, really try to involve participants, teachers, stakeholders, partners in this process right from the start, to think about what is the data that we want to collect? How do we want to collect it? How can people be actively involved in collecting this data with us? Because you'll come up with much more powerful ideas, and people will feel ownership of this. They'll be involved in the learning and the adaptation and thinking about how to take this work forward in the future. Okay, now we're going into the exciting part of thinking, what is the data that we're going to collect to answer these questions, and how we're going to collect this data? So we're going to go back into a Jamboard. And now that we've reflected on our theory of change, our learning questions, we've seen some of the data that Wikimedia Bolivia has developed. We've reflected a bit on this. Let's help them think of some of the data that will help them to answer some of those learning questions that we've thought of. And remember, here we're talking about qualitative data. I've given there some examples, such as feedback, perceptions, and then we can also think of some quantitative data that will be relevant. But let's focus more on the qualitative data that will tell us the why and the how and the deeper understanding. So take just a minute to think of one data, two, and we'll come back and share some ideas. So great. Now we've thought of some data. A few examples that Vas and I thought of was the importance of really knowing if our training strategies were effective and the resources that we have. So having as much feedback as possible on the different elements of the training format and the documents and how they were distributed and accessibility. Another is, if the percentage of teachers that feel they have the skills to support and implement this in the classroom, the skills and the support to implement this in the classroom. So things like, have they acquired the skills? Are they developing the activities for the classroom? But also, do they feel supported to do so? Are there any existing barriers for them to do in time, policies, the educational system support? Are they motivated to do this? So these are some of the data that we thought would be interesting to collect. And now I am handing it over to Vas, who's going to talk about how do we collect this data. Over to you, Vas.
So one of the tools that we can use, and it is quite common to use as well, is using a semi-structured interview. What kind of questions can we ask to teachers? So basically, the semi-structured interviews are used to access information from a person or small group on pre-identified topics, while at the same time allowing for new questions to arrive during questions. They can be carried out with individuals or with groups. And this kind of interview is different with like different interviews to use to generate formal survey information, because the question that we ask are not always in the same order and not always in the same way in every interview. So it really depends on how the answers are guiding us. You may also want to interview a couple of teachers that are unable to finish the training programs to understand what went wrong or what was challenging for them to continue, which can later help us determine how to tweak the program better for the next edition. So let's go to the examples. So the first example is we can ask the teacher, how did the program impacted your teaching practice? And then the second example is, what did you enjoy the most while participating in the program? And what was the most challenging part of participating? With this question, we can definitely learn a lot on how we can improve the experience of teachers in participating in this program for the next cohort. And then how did the program change your perspective on Wikipedia and media and information literacy, or of using Wikipedia as part of your teaching practice? And then what did you appreciate the most or find the most challenging in the educational resources used in the program? And then you can mention the names of the resources and tools and platform that you use in the program. Note that the first question, you can also ask this when you're doing an impact evaluation, perhaps in 3 months after the completion, 6 months after the completion, or even 1 year after the teachers has finished the program. And then another tool that we can use to assess teachers' learning outcomes is artifacts. So an example of an artifact that demonstrates learning outcome is the final assignment. So teachers can be asked like to incorporate all of what they learn over the 3 modules into a lesson plan, for example. And that lesson plan is evaluated by projects team, and if they pass the requirement in the final assessment, it then leads to a certificate for the teachers. So for example, you can see on the left side, there is like a lesson plan with some pictures in it that was there was a lesson plan created by one of the teachers during the first iteration of the Reading Wikipedia in the classroom. And then, so this that we use as also a tool to evaluate their learning. So we look at how many teachers are able to complete these final assignments to a satisfactory level. So we assess the lesson plans as well. And then, so there is a lot of data that we can take from reviewing the final assignments, as well as the formative assessments we use throughout the course. Other ways to use artifacts is to analyze record of classroom observations during the training. It can be online. It can also be, if you're doing this in person, you can also do the classroom observations in the actual classroom. And then you can also monitor the answers from the discussion forums and see how teachers are asking questions, how teachers are interacting with one another, with the instructor. You may also set up a peer review forms for them to fill. And then, so yeah, there are a lot of ways that we can use artifacts to demonstrate learning outcomes of teachers. And so the next one is conducting survey. This is also very commonly used to evaluate a program. So how we form and frame the question will determine our success in capturing those qualitative impacts that we wanted to learn. For example, question number 1, we would like to know if the program has done its job to help teachers incorporate Wikipedia in the classroom. So the question is, do you think the program is helping you to better incorporate Wikipedia in your classroom to foster media and information literacy skills? And then question 2, you can see clearly that it says, how confident are you in applying your new knowledge and skills about Wikipedia in the next school year? So this question 2 is trying to figure out whether teachers' confidence level to incorporate Wikipedia has increased, and whether teachers are also thinking of incorporating it in the next school year or semester. So you can see, like, our teacher motivated to incorporate it in the next school year or semester. And then you can also turn this question in confidence into a Likert scale, for example. So say from 1 to 5, 1 being I'm still very skeptical, to 5 being I'm very confident. Like, how confident are you in applying your new skills about Wikipedia in your classroom? So yeah, think about different ways. Yeah, you can ask the survey questions. And then for sample question number 3 is about to understand if teachers can fully comprehend the content and are able to prepare to guide their students in using Wikipedia. So like you notice, the answers type on the right side, a lot of these examples are open-ended questions. But then, as I mentioned, there are ways to turn this survey into easier questions to answer by the teachers. For example, if there are a lot of open-ended text box questions, like a lot of people tend to be discouraged to finish survey if they are faced with this kind of big questions where they have to write their answers in the text box. But if you see on number 4, for example, we can turn a big question into several statements and provide options for teachers to choose instead of asking them to describe their experience or perceptions. So yeah, here on number 4, we would like to know how are the teachers' perceptions toward Wikipedia has changed over after they participated in the teachers' training. So you can ask, like, do you agree, somewhat agree or disagree with the following statements? So particularly for these statements asking about perceptions, it was also a way, there's also a way to collect baseline data by asking them these questions and by asking them this, presenting them these statements um, before the program started or in the pre-program survey. So you ask the same statements in the pre-program survey, and then we ask the teachers to rate their perception again at the same aspects after undergoing the program through the program survey, post-program evaluation survey. And then we can measure how many teachers who said that it's not okay for their students to use Wikipedia before the program started. And then now they have changed their perceptions or attitude about the use of Wikipedia for their students in the classrooms. However, please note that this type of method, uh, like measuring the before and after the program, may be good to use to measure changing perceptions, but perhaps also on changing confidence level, but it is not sufficient in measuring learning outcomes. In measuring learning outcomes, it's better if you do like I presented on the previous slides to do artifacts, give them assignments and um, other assessment methods. And then next is in using visual medias. So it's basically an activity of filming or photographing certain activities or conditions. It can also include other visual or arts methods such as painting or sculptures. The purpose is to present information in a more engaging way and increase understanding of a project or program implementation results. Um, so this method can also help in visualizing different kinds of information. In many cases, it helps to reveal hidden meaning that may not be possible to be captured through a survey approach. Maybe the teachers there, they didn't really say what they really want to say through writing. And so we can capture this from like asking them to take a photograph and then ask them to like tell it from your story, like what's your interpretation of the photo, what is happening during the activities, or even record a video of them just like talking through their experience in the program. So yeah, after capturing the activities, a group of teachers can discuss or interpret the medias, the visuals material that they have produced, and they can find patterns that can be highlighted. Maybe you will find some surprising things maybe that you haven't heard before, and in the situation of lack of resources like lack of camera equipment, you can always use a phone. Well, if there's like a lack of phones, smartphones to take photos or videos, teachers can also create sketches, um, or maybe they can draw or doodle to describe and represent their experience during their training programs. It is a fun process. A lot of this um, tool and method is used with students as well, because it's very engaging for students to do this. So yeah, the method that I mentioned before, it's quite known. If you want to Google it, it's quite known as photo voice. So it's a method where people can capture photos and videos, and then they can describe it through their own words. So the step-by-step on doing the photo voice is the first step is to recruit participants. So at least one mentor, one facilitator, and staff volunteers, and also the participants, the teachers, participants. And then the second step is to include some participants in this process if we can. So establish what you want to learn and what the participants, teachers or students, what they want to learn and reflect. You can also frame the questions prompts based on your predetermined learning questions on this stage to include later in the photo voice instructions. You can find the photo voice instructions on the right side of the screen. And then on step 3 is this includes technical trainings on how to use the camera equipment, basics on how to take good angle or capture good sound for videos, etc. And you can also do training on ethical and safe photography training. Uh, you can discuss what are the subjects that are sensitive or private and needs permission to take, or is it okay to photograph children? Do you need a release form, for example, to photograph children? Do you need a consent form? And then on step 4, just get out and take pictures. So we can give a time frame for teachers to take photos during their home assignments, maybe take photos of their when they're doing their assignments, or like take photos of screen, or like other tools that they're using to do their assignments. Or if you are doing it in person training or activities, let them document the activities based on the prompts. Or maybe they wanted to what is it? They are resharing or this experience with other teachers. You can ask them to record them, or they can discuss this with fellow teachers in the same school that is doing the training. They can maybe take photos or videos of those activities. And then step 5 is to discuss, reflect, and choose. So you can divide teachers and students into groups, facilitate the group to choose the best photos, and facilitate discussion to interpret the photos and videos. This is important as they will have to write descriptions and captions for the next phase. So discussions can include why they took the shot, why they took the video, the intent of the picture, and how it made them feel, and maybe the photo's strong connections to the issue. Are a lot of ways that we can spark discussions among teachers. And then the final step is to exhibit the photos or the videos. So it can be an exhibition of the photographs. It can be in person or online. You can create like a mini gallery somewhere in a school or in a in a village district, or you can also do it online, such as creating a storytelling or storyboard somewhere, or in Wikimedia, upload them on Wikimedia Commons, and then maybe create a collage, and then make a video on YouTube, or you can use any other online platform that you think um, suitable for this. So yeah, on the right side, you can find like a sample of photo voice instructions. As I mentioned on the first section there, you can, those are the questions prompts to guide teachers on how to take the visual material, like the video and the images. And then the second, remind them to also write 2-3 sentences about each photos, each best photos, because you don't want them to write like take like 100 photos and then write 2 to 3 sentences for each photos. That will be too much. And then the third one is to save photos. You can just print this and then give it to teachers as their instructions. And then, so yeah, let's get creative. What other tools do you think can you think of to measure these results of learnings or the impact of reading Wikipedia in the classroom? Let's head over to a Jamboard. I'll give you like 2 minutes, I think, to capture your ideas. And then I'll link the Jamboard in the chat as well. Let's head over to the Jamboard. Okay. Let's see. Okay. 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 So yeah, you can just put your ideas here, or you can create another sticky note with your idea, change colors. So yeah, let's give 2 minutes. All right, 2 minutes up. For those of you watching live, feel free to come back and add more things to the Jamboard. For those watching the recording, feel free to pause the video and maybe take your time thinking about what are the tools you can use to measure results of this project. Also, feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section too. And then now let's move on to the next section. So now we've collected the data, and now what? So Jessica will explain how to share our learning and findings. Next, Jessica.
So now just to finalize, as I said in the beginning, it's really important that we take the time, now that we've gone through this whole effort of collecting data and doing all these wonderful things that Vas has described. How do we create the time, the space, and the methods to really learn from this data collectively and take decisions based on this data? So some ideas are having learning sessions with our peers and our teams. So Wikimedia Bolivia, in this case, to get their teams together and really reflect and make decisions based on the data. It's a good practice to do this every with some frequency, so every 3 months for a year's project. I've linked in some fun strategies to do this type of learning retrospectives and using the data to be able to learn. And also learning sessions, as I've mentioned throughout this this workshop, with participants. And this would be interesting to do at the midterm of the project and towards the end of the project, so we can reflect collectively with participants on. So when I talk about participants in this case, it would be some of the teachers that are mentors, some of the coordinators, maybe some people from the Ministry of Education if they're getting involved, so we can collectively reflect on this. And also, how do we communicate our findings? And there's a lot of creative ways of telling our story. Today, obviously, video is a very powerful way, but there's also infographics, there's also different blogs, social media, graphics. And here are just a couple of tools that we're linking in that you can start exploring, that don't need high technical or design skills, but to start communicating our work in a way that creates emotion, creates engagement, but tells the depth of our work. And finally, what I would like to say is that this isn't the only space that we'll be able to share and learn from each other. We will be starting to develop with a working group of community members and with the foundation support a peer learning program called Let's Connect, where evaluation will be a key part of the learning that we're going to do, and bringing in case studies and learning from each other. So stay tuned, and we hope to see you in Let's Connect as sharers of all your experience and your wonderful work. Thank you.